This programme was made with the support of the Broadcasting Authority of Ireland.
You're listening to the 7th programme of Giving the Greatest Good, and in this programme we continue our investigation into the remarkable story of James and Mary Ellis of Letterfrack in County Galway.
The Ellises came here moved by accounts from the famine.
The Ellises came in, they offered employment, they offered food, they offered advancement, development in the area.
James Ellis, he would have been comparable to a multi-millionaire money-wise, and he just ploughed his money in. He just ploughed his money there.
Certainly there were people who put their necks on the line.
They actually lived their religion.
They were very much inspired by their faith, love of humanity, respect for other people.
They were remembered not as proselytisers, but well motivated simply to relieve the awful conditions of people.
They paid above the going rate for labour at the time, even though they didn't have to.
These people were really put their money where their hearts were.
They didn't salve their consciences by giving some of their money away to help others. They thought of practical things they could do with it, which would help others.
As I say, the people of this area particularly look upon them as heroes, that they did a huge amount of good work.
They tried to do the greatest amount of good.
I'm Paul Wright and welcome to the 7th programme of Giving the Greatest Good. In our last programme we threw light on the remarkable story of the Quaker couple James and Mary Ellis. We heard how in 1849 they left their comfortable home in Bradford, England, to go live in Letterfrack in Connemara and help stave off hunger and destitution for many people there by giving employment at a fair wage. And we got to the point in their story where the Ellises had initiated a major building scheme in Letterfrack, constructing a school, dispensary and many other invaluable buildings for the community. However, the Ellises also strove hard to become model farmers on their 1,000-acre estate in Letterfrack and set an example to other landholders of prudent farm management. Here's Joan Johnson, historian and also author of the book James and Mary Ellis, Background in Quaker Famine Relief in Letterfrack, to take up the story.
James would have tried to introduce different methods of growing crops and introducing things like turnips and peas and cabbages, and he writes back to his brother saying that all of these are growing very well on his land. So those are the kind of things.
Indeed, the Ellises introduced not only new crops and various other agri-innovations, but today's eco-warriors would have loved them, since they also planted 11,000 trees on the land which now forms the nucleus of Connemara National Park. The Ellises also established a thriving village shop. Historian Joan Johnson.
They set up a little shop so that the people there could actually bring in their butter, their milk, their eggs and the poultry, and they would sell it. And of course the Ellises would have bought it, and would encourage some of their neighbours to, because the other landlords, Mary is quite critical of the landlords around, saying that, they could have done more. But and she has pertinent comments about the church, certainly, and the mission schools. And at one stage they tried, the mission was trying to hire the Quaker school house for the meetings, and the Ellises refused.
And keeping with the thorny topic of proselytising, Letterfrack local historian Kieran O'Donoghue had this to say about the Ellises' ecumenical approach, which was hated by some and loved by others.
They were very much inspired by their faith, love of humanity, respect for other people. And they were here at a time when a lot of Proselytising began in the area by some of the so-called Christian churches, what we call the Christian churches today. They didn't get involved in that at all, and they aroused some ire among local landlords by paying more than they needed to pay. But at one stage, I understand, they employed about 80 men around Letterfrack, which would of course been huge employment at that time. And it's recorded that the local priest was at first opposed to their arrival in Letterfrack because he felt they were a threat to his community. But it wasn't long, not long after they were here, he began to praise them because the contributions to his church began to go up because people had a bit more money, and he saw the silver lining, as it were, in the Quaker cloud.
Indeed, on the 6th of June in 1850, Mary Ellis wrote as follows to relatives in England.
It is no ways flattering nor of a good savour, but we seem to be getting into favour with the Roman Catholic priests. James got highly extolled from the pulpit about a fortnight since, set, I believe, in contrast with the rest of the masters here, who keep back the hire of the labourer. But one may see that we, in this, make them better sons of the Church by enabling them to pay their dues, which have dropped in very scantily of late. Yesterday John of Tuam stopped his carriage to pay a visit to the school with 2 other priests, and expressed his satisfaction in it.
And to help place the Ellises' ecumenical approach in a proper historical context, Connemara historian Kathleen Villiers-Tuttle had this pertinent comment to make.
At the time when the Ellises came into the west of Ireland in 1849, at that same time there was another organisation moving into Ireland, into Connemara. They were called the Irish Church Mission, and this was a society that was set up in England with the specific aim of converting the Roman Catholics of Ireland to the Protestant faith. And they were funded and organised in England, and they came over here into Connemara because this was the area that was so badly hit by the famine, and they saw an opening here. But also because they were encouraged by the local landlord at the time, Hyacinth Darcy, who went on to become a clergyman when he lost his lands after the famine. And so they set up mission schools and the mission churches, and they offered food, and they offered employment, and they offered clothing to the people, and they opened orphanages, which were badly needed, as you can imagine, after the famine. So the condition of the food and the condition of the clothing was that you take your Bible readings and you were encouraged to come to services and that you convert to the Protestant faith, and they offered you employment as a result of that as well. They were a very, very strong organisation here from the 1849 right up until the 1880s. Extremely strong, very powerful, very well supported by the local landed people. Now, when you counteract that with what happened when the Ellises came in, they offered decent employment, they offered food, they offered advancement, development in the area, and they never asked you to compromise your faith. They never asked you to believe anything to do with their religion. They didn't ram the Bible down your throat. And they would argue in some of their own letters that the biggest problem they had was with the missionary people, not necessarily the Catholic churches or anything like that. Their biggest problem was the missionary people who were trying to take over their schoolhouse and trying to bring them into their flock. So that was their biggest problem. They just offered employment, a decent wage, and they didn't ask you to give them anything in return.
Emboldened by Erin's grievous mind, the Ellises from Bradford came on the scene. Working hard from 49, they gave schools jobs and something fine.
And staying with the issue of proselytising, which was so rife in Connemara during the period which the Ellises resided there, Kathleen Villiers-Tuttle also had this to say regarding why so many people changed their religion by taking the soup.
People took the soup because they were starving, and they were quite happy to move from one religion to the other depending on the harvest. And this, you could track them over the years. I mean, if the harvest was bad and you needed to receive your food, you would say anything to the guy. You paid lip service to whoever was giving you the food, and then you converted back again to the Catholic faith when things were good. And you just, it was quite common, and it happened with a lot of families, and it was an important way of staying alive. There was no moral issue as far as they were concerned. They were trying to stay alive. But of course the dilemma was that you were ousted by your family, you were ostracised by your neighbours, you were treated extremely badly by the Catholic Church, and you were caught between the two of them, and both churches were just counting heads. They weren't really interested in the people themselves. They were counting heads, and they were trying to prove their case, and they went into law, and they were all over the newspapers, and they had pitch battles on the street. It was an absolutely atrocious time.
They actually had pitched battles on the street. This would have been in Galway City, maybe, or even here in Clifton itself.
Clifton, not in Galway City, in Clifton. And it would mean that if a family had gone over to the other side, and
a jumper,
if they'd jumped from one religion to the other and taken the soup, they would be ostracised by their neighbours and their friends, and then they would be the preachers, the Protestant preachers from the missions. The Catholic priests used to encourage the population of the town to stone them, or to, attack them in any way they could on fair days and things like that. And you would have faction fights between those who had jumped, taken the soup, and who were now becoming, some of them really became very earnest Protestants and parts of the mission, and they took up houses and land and everything that was offered to them by the mission. And you would have faction fight between them and between what was their near neighbours of the past, or even their relations on the streets.
I'm a brand from the barn and a genuine saint, newly purged and set free from papistical taint. Yes, I'm one of that holy and sanctified troop, whose souls have been chastened by flannel and soup.
And leaving aside all talk of taking the soup and returning to just how the Ellises' work progressed in Letterfrack, the following humorous story was recorded by one of the Ellises' relatives.
At the time, James Mary Ellis had as servants a mother and daughter, whom they had rescued from the famine. One day Mary heard a fearful quarrel going on in the kitchen, and listening found that they were differing as to who should go down to the spring to fetch water. Without saying anything, Mary got the yoke and 2 buckets and went off down to the spring herself, they not seen her go. When she got back, she took the water to the kitchen and said to the 2 women, "Next time you want water, don't quarrel as to who should go, but come and tell me, and I'll fetch it myself." The other people about, who had seen Mary going to the spring with the buckets, teased the 2 women ever after about it.
However, despite Mary and James Ellis' sterling efforts to lead by example, and despite their enormous success in helping to develop Letterfrack and give meaningful and much needed employment with fair wages to many, nevertheless by 1857, after almost 8 years since they'd left their native Bradford, James Ellis' health began to fail. Joan Johnson.
Oh, it was most unexpected. Now, James had worked himself, I'd say, to the bone. He became ill. They had intended to settle there, there's no doubt about that. And James Austin, the son, was involved, and Catherine was there. But James got sick. Now, he was always taking care of Mary and making sure, and knew that she was away from her kindred spirits, as it were, and her family in Bradford. So, and I think he must have realised that he possibly was going to die. So he had ill health in a serious manner. And so that's from my research, certainly, and there's no other indication but that his health failed. And rather than thinking that if he died, that he'd be leaving Mary there, because he was obviously driving this project, they decided they would reluctantly have to return, because they had settled down very well and the whole enterprise was going well, that they would have to return. So in 1857 they left Letterfrack, and they went back not to Bradford. They retired up to Pickering in Yorkshire, and they settled there. But what happened, to the surprise of everybody, was Ellis recovered and Mary was dead within 3 months.
My God, that was certainly a turnabout in fortunes, wasn't it? Or predicted fortunes.
Yes. So, life is unpredictable. So James lived on in Pickering, and in fact, Paul Wright went to visit Pickering Quaker meeting, and in my book we have the 2 stones in the Quaker graveyard belonging to James and Mary. He took a photograph of them, and so they're buried there in Pickering Quaker graveyard there. So it was a tragedy, really.
And here's Letterfrack local historian Paul Wright to talk about that visit to Pickering graveyard in recent years, to pay his respects to James and Mary Ellis.
I just got the train up and was dropped off about 11 miles or so from Pickering, and I got a taxi. So I was fine, I got there quite easy. But it's a lovely little town, and I found the Quaker graveyard, which was, I suppose it was finished as a graveyard then. It was closed down. It was actually a lovely lawn with flower beds in it, and all around the walls were these headstones. They'd moved all the headstones from the graveyard, and they had them all placed along the walls. There was ivy growing over them, so I had to kind of dig away the odd bit of ivy just to get a photograph of the names, So it was it's a nearly kind of a thing, really, thinking about, what they had done for Letterfrack. It's like sort of coming to the end of a journey, like when I actually got there and I found them, and there was 3 headstones in it. There was James and Mary, and then there was their son, who came to Letterfrack and lived in Letterfrack. And if you look at the book, like, you'll see that his address is down for Rosthu, my yard, or Rosthu, County Galway, I think it is, which is in my yard, and that's back there in Ross. It's about 3 miles from Letterfrack. So he had a house back there, and he actually died there and was moved from there to all the way back to England.
Be not afraid to proclaim their deeds, those brave few souls who answered needs, to countless victims unable to cope. They were the few, the warriors of hope.
Indeed, it was in 1860 that the Ellis' son, James Austin Ellis, went to his maker. And so the Ellis family were now totally departed from the Letterfrack area. James and Mary had resided there 8 years, and in that time wrought enormous change for the betterment of the community. So what caused James's eventual burnout? Joan Johnson.
I would think James, from studying his character, he was 100% man. He was doing everything, and therefore, he was calling the shots for everything: the building works, the farming, the drainage, the schemes, and on top of visitors that came as well. There's a lot of interesting visitors that came. So, and the harshness of the weather and the living conditions out there. Now, they had a nice home and everything, but the work outside was very hard, and winter, certainly in Connemara in those days, would have been very, very harsh. So I think it all took its toll, and in 1957 his health failed eventually. And I'd say he was a very strong, impetuous kind of man, and probably Mary had no influence. In some of the letters, she does refer to saying, "I wish James would take it more easy," and she refers to his ill health at that stage. So she did have an influence, obviously, that maybe they should return, but it was a tragedy and a sudden thing.
Be not afraid to proclaim their deeds, the brave few answered others' needs. The countless victims unable to cope, they were the few, warriors of hope.
While the Ellis' work in Letterfrack was unexpectedly cut short in 1857, nevertheless, the commitment, energy and substantial success which they achieved in a relatively short period of 8 years would prove a lasting beneficial legacy to Letterfrack. Letterfrack resident Mary Ruddy.
A wider legacy is that the way they've done it and why they remember it, I think, so well is that they didn't do it as a charity where there was handouts or soup kitchens. Now, I'm sure there were, crisis situations where maybe that was, but at least what we hear and heard growing up was that they offered people well-paid employment. So people did a productive day's work for a fair wage, and in that way. So I think that is really what their legacy is and why they're remembered so well. So I think, and I think that's good. Maybe that's a good legacy for us today in terms of how we treat, the whole question of international aid and how we treat people less off, even in this country.
I would probably say the kind of work ethic and community spirit would be probably the two things that people would remember them most by.
Connemara historian Brendan O'Scanall.
I suppose that comes very much from what they gave to the people here, that people took up that idea that you must help everybody to help yourself, or help yourself to help everybody. It's a kind of a very important aspect, I think, that none of us are islands. We might think we are at times, and maybe even wish we were, but the fact that without a community working together, nothing really happens. And I think that was probably something that they left behind them. Maybe in a kind of a folk memory it mightn't have come out straight away, but I think people now are appreciating more the fact that they gave us that kind of opportunity to realise that we could do things for ourselves as well, and I suppose that's the main thing they've left us.
Well, when I go and visit Letterfrack and meet the people that I have been working with over the years there, the legacy to me is Connemara West and Connemara National Park. There's no doubt about that. Connemara West is a community development association, and to me the legacy of Ellis is seen in that, because what Ellis did and left was the framework, as it were. It was there. His memory has endured. He taught, I would think, many of those 90 people he employed how to work well. And in fact, when Mitchell was doing Kylemore,
Mitchell Henry would have built Kylemore in the 1860s or thereabouts.
He paid tribute to what he called the Ellis men, that they were great workers. So you have the work ethic, which I think Ellis laid down. It might have been a small one, but it has filtered through.
And keeping with Kylemore Estate, which is situated just a few miles from Letterfrack, the already mentioned Mitchell Henry built the famed Kylemore Castle, nowadays known as Kylemore Abbey, in the late 19th century. Kieran O'Donoghue, former director of Connemara West Development Association, had this pertinent comment to make regarding the enormity of the Ellises' enterprise in Letterfrack.
Kylemore Abbey, which was a derelict estate into the early part of the last century, into the 1900s, around 1910, 1912, when it was purchased by the Benedictine nuns as their community. That was bought for 45,000 sterling in 1912-13, which would have been an absolutely colossal sum, probably equivalent to 45 million today. So what the Quakers did here, it would be very interesting to estimate what it would have been worth today, but certainly I wouldn't have any doubt, even after a 20-year period of great development in Letterfrack through Connemara West and the local community, which maybe would amount to an investment in today's terms worth 10 or 15 million, I don't have any doubt that what the Quakers did in a 10-year period would be several multiples of that in value.
James and Mary Ellis stayed at Letterfrack for about 8 years and had the satisfaction of accomplishing a great deal of what they attempted. They lifted up many poor from a condition of degradation to one of comparative comfort, and enabled some of the surplus population to emigrate, who, doing well themselves, afterwards sent money to assist their families to emigrate. They built a school, a temperance hotel, a dispensary, a doctor's residence and some labourers' cottages in Letterfrack. They also gave employment with fair wages to dozens and helped save the village of Letterfrack.
You know, we are the descendants, like, of the survivors, you know, so, like, I suppose we could say, like, that we are the survivors of Letterfrack, like, you know. I suppose when you look at it, like, you know, it was the only free anything that ever came into Letterfrack, like, in that they came with their money, like, and spent it generously, like, and put all their efforts into it, like, you know. I'm not sure how many more places that has been done, you know.
And I think he gave them confidence. And that is there. It's a vibrant organism in Letterfrack. I can feel it.
Historian Joan Johnson. And here's Kieran O'Donoghue to once again share his views.
I think probably the more time has gone on, the more that people have begun to realise, you know, what a significant move they made and what a contribution they made to the area in a very short period of time. Again, you would say, well, if all of this happened over 30, 40 or 50 years, that would have been remarkable. But the fact that it happened in such a short period of time and that they laid the foundations, certainly in terms of land, planting and buildings that they did, it truly was remarkable for the middle of the 19th century.
And so we come to the end of our odyssey of discovery into the remarkable story of James and Mary Ellis, and how they helped to stave off hunger and destitution for a large number of people in Letterfrack during the grim years of mid-19th century Ireland. This programme was made with the support of the Broadcasting Authority of Ireland, songs by Cliff Wedgbury. And until our next number 8 programme in this 9-part Giving the Greatest Good series, I'm going to leave you with some wise words from the heroine in this programme, that's Mary Ellis, when she wrote the following in 1850 from Letterfrack to relatives in England.
I do not believe that it was intended that any, the richest or the best, should sit down in their drawing rooms, to be waited on hand and foot, pampered, till they think the world is made for them. The world is a mighty family, and each, if worth anything, might find his own place in it, for the good of some others besides himself.
Certainly they seem to get a lot done in a very brief period of time.
Without a community working together, nothing really happens. And I think that was probably something that they left behind them. But I think people now are appreciating more the fact that they gave us that opportunity to realise that we could do things for ourselves as well.
They saw other human beings who were desperate, who needed help.
It's a story showing that always there are good people, and that good people actually are effective.
Emboldened by Erin's grievous mind, the Ellises from Bradford came on the scene. Working hard from 49, they gave schools jobs and something fine. Be not afraid to proclaim their deeds, those brave few souls who answered needs. To countless victims unable to cope, they were the few warriors of hope. Jacob Harvey's love for man shone bright. He too paid the ultimate price, helping Irish in New York. He died from overwork, that others survived. Be not afraid to proclaim their deeds, the brave few who answered others' needs. The countless victims unable to cope, they were the warriors of Hope. Be not afraid to proclaim their deeds, the brave few answered others' needs.